here I am once again at the community newspapers with our producer behind the scenes. Tommy, I need to give you a shout out because you have been superb in helping us put this show together, which I think we're going to have a very, very good show today. We have two guests. It was originally scheduled to have Mayor Gelber from Dan Gelber from Miami Beach on at noon, but he's at a conference right now with doctors from across the country, Doctors Against COVID. He'll be here shortly, a little bit later, to explain to us, give us hot off the press information on that, what was divulged, what the strategy is for our state and community to pursue in this fight against COVID to protect everyone. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest, which was scheduled for the second half of the show, Alissa Schafer. Alissa, tell us about
Hello.
yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Another beautiful morning here in South Florida.
Yes.
Glad that the timing worked out. I've been in South Florida, gosh, since 2012 now, and every time this time of year comes around, I'm from Michigan originally. This
A lot
is
colder there.
yes, this is about when all the friends and family back home start getting a little bit jealous. But yeah, South Florida's home. I live down here with my daughter, and I work in the advocacy and policy space, specifically focused on energy policy. I got my start in building materials in the solar industry, and several years ago, quickly realized how important policy is to the future of this state that we love so much, and even just economics and jobs. So really from there, just started dialing in on the policy side of things, and currently researching with Energy and Policy Institute and keeping an eye on what's going on in the state, really.
So, by the way, I had an opportunity to say hi to your daughter. Tell her good morning, and
Yes.
I hope she's doing well today. So, anyway, little girl, you've been researching and keeping tabs of the power utility companies. Why?
Well, here in Florida, our utilities are very powerful. We have what's called a monopoly. The investor-owned utilities, we have Florida Power and Light, Gulf Power. Those are both sister companies owned by NextEra. They're the largest. Then you have Duke, and then you have TECO. You also have a handful of municipal power companies, for example, in Orlando, Jacksonville, Lake Worth, some smaller ones. But by and large, the investor-owned utilities, the monopolies, are very important because they have a lot of influence. We have a state of over 20 million people, and wherever you live, you are assigned your power provider. You do not have a choice. That's the definition of a monopoly, right? So with that much power comes a lot of potential to make changes and make impacts. And, we get so used to we go throughout our day, we flip on the light switch, we get on the internet, we're using power, and we kind of take it for granted. But, this year, with the COVID pandemic, I think a lot of people started paying attention to just how impactful the power companies can be in a different way, because hundreds of thousands of folks literally were facing having their power shut off. And that's just one example, but it was a light bulb, pardon the use of a pun, for a lot of folks. It's just how crucial electricity is in our daily life, and how much impact these companies have as monopolies, because we don't have any other choices.
I have to tell you, I mean, for any of us that have gone through the storm scares, right? Whether it's a hurricane or tropical storm that seem to come through here once a year, and the power goes out, man, I can't believe how dependent we are on the power, right?
Yeah.
Very, very little can be done without power. As a matter of fact, after Irma, while I was in the legislature, I was part of a member of the select committee on hurricane preparedness and response. And I had the mayor and the manager of the county of Palm Beach come to us and tell us that after Irma came through, which was a tropical storm on our side of the state, roughly, I think it was 1,800 traffic intersection lights, the power went out. And they were looking for ways to build out resilience. And I wanted to ask you a question, break you from what you were saying. We always hear about resilience, but what is resilience? And what is that industry about?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a great topic, one that I'm glad that we're able to talk about. We here in South Florida, we really are ground zero for climate change.
Mhm.
And that's not even a controversial statement at this point, because people here, regardless of your political party, businesses, families, we're already experiencing the impact of climate change. We're experiencing increased weather events. We're experiencing increased flooding. Even this year with the storm that we had, it didn't turn into a hurricane for most parts, but here in South Florida, we had homes that had flooding that they had never seen before. And this is an impact of climate change. So when we talk about resiliency, we're seeing businesses, local governments doing what they have to do to adapt to this. Now, I think an interesting aspect of that a lot of times doesn't get brought up is, we talk about adaptation. So
Mhm.
that's raising the roads, the pumping systems, making sure that we're protecting our coastlines, restoring our coastlines, becoming more resilient against these climate events and increased weather events. But the other side of that is, of course, mitigation. So what are we doing to prevent those storms from getting worse, from getting more frequent, to having more extreme flooding, more extreme winds, and more frequently? Um, and that comes back to the question of ultimately emissions. So sometimes, we talk about the resiliency industry and we're talking about raising roads and all of that stuff, but I think it's also important to talk about what are we doing to keep that problem from getting worse. And
Mhm.
that's where we get into the question of mitigation and transitioning our state from our dependence on fossil fuels to clean energy, so that we're not just spewing more emissions into the air.
So let me pause you there for a second.
Yes.
So for those of you that are watching, and so that you don't get confused, because I often get, I mean, this is a complicated topic, right? Especially when you get into the nitty-gritty. We have the fossil industry versus the clean energy industry, right? And
Yes.
there's always a struggle. But these companies, and I would love to invite representatives of Next Gen, FPNL, Duke, to come out and talk to us about their side, right? But the point being is that there's a this can't get done. The policies changes cannot be done without their involvement in government, right? And shaping policies. And I know you published a report on December 4th. And if you could just give us a quick brief about it, you know, explain the relationship, or the need for the relationship between these power companies and the legislature, and also the need for the relationship building of individuals like us, voters, and the legislators.
All right, so that's about 5 questions, so I'll do my best.
Okay.
um, so going back to what we started talking about, since we are a monopoly marketplace as customers, we have no choice.
Mm-hmm.
So even though folks in South Florida are doing what we can to take steps towards resiliency, we are still dependent on what companies like FPL are doing. Because we have no other option. So you're absolutely correct. We are dependent on them. So as an industry, they need to be taking steps to move towards a clean energy future. In Florida, the utilities are regulated by what's called the Public Service Commission. And then they're also regulated, of course, by our laws, which are in the Florida legislature. So when the utilities talk about Florida on their investor calls as an investor-owned company, they refer to Florida as what is considered a friendly regulatory environment. That's investor speak for they can do pretty much whatever they want. And the way that they have gotten to that point is by investing politically. And when you say investing politically, that means political donations and lobbying primarily.
And that information is also public information, right?
Yes.
Anyone can obtain the information you're talking about.
Yes.
So
To a certain extent, and then it starts to get a little tricky, and maybe
Okay.
we can talk about that. You're correct that political donations are public record. Every candidate who files has to publish a campaign report. Anybody can go online and research that and see who's giving to them. Where it starts to get a little bit more hidden or complicated is when you have committees, political committees, PACs getting involved, because there's all these different PACs that have millions of dollars, and folks may not know who is contributing to a PAC. And one group, for example, Florida Power and Light, donated over $5 million this last cycle to a bunch of different PACs. And then those PACs turn around and support a bunch of different candidates or policies that they're hoping to see an outcome of. So very quickly, you start to see a big web. What the report that you mentioned that we published on December 4th took a look specifically at just overall utility spending. So the Florida utilities, that being NextEra, FPL, Gulf, TECO, and Duke, spent over $9 million this last cycle alone, just in political contributions that were publicly reported in that manner. That's a lot of millions of dollars.
A lot of zeros.
Yes. We also saw, there was a lot of attention paid to a handful of Senate races that were considered competitive this cycle. Specifically, here in South Florida, we had Senate District 37, which is now in a little bit of controversy with multiple investigations going on. So I took a look at where the utility money was flowing. A lot of it did go to the Republican Party committee. A lot of it also went to the Republican Senatorial Committee.
And some of it went to the Democrats, right?
Of course, yeah. Yes. Overwhelmingly, however, you have to point out where millions of dollars went to Republicans, it was significantly, we're talking hundreds of thousands to the Democrats. So a very disproportionate amount there. So on the Senate side, you have the Florida Republican Senatorial Committee. They spent over $34 million this cycle. So, they were getting money from folks other than the utilities, of course. A lot of it connected to special interest groups such as Associated Industries of Florida, or AIF. But we saw that money focused specifically on races such as District 37, which as...
So I want to ask you, why is this important to consumers?
I think, politics... In the last 4 years, a lot more people have started to pay attention to politics and our elections specifically. And it can be disheartening once folks start to realize how many millions of dollars or billions of dollars nationally really gets thrown around. You hear that money in politics matters, and it does, but that can also be depressing. And I think that for voters who want to understand what is going on and want to have a shot at helping make a difference, it's incredibly important to understand where that money is coming from, where it's going, and why. If you have a monopoly utility who is spending millions of dollars every cycle to make sure that they maintain control of the current regulatory environment and hold on to the status quo, that's a problem. And to take it back to what we were originally talking about with resiliency and the future economic state in Florida, with the Biden-Harris administration, they have publicly committed to a decarbonization of the power sector, so utilities, by the year 2035.
For those that don't understand about decarbonization, can you give a top line explanation about it, brief explanation about it?
Yes. So decarbonization is, for the power sector, is generating power without emissions. So right now, for example, in Florida, and even 10 years from now, we're projected to still be over 60% reliant on fossil fuel gas. That is generating emissions. Solar energy, solar plus storage, for example, solar, when you have combining the solar panels with the batteries, that is zero emissions. So the Biden-Harris administration has made this commitment, zero or decarbonization by 2035. Right now, Florida is not on that trajectory. So, and as they continue to invest in what we see as the status quo, it begs the question, what are they going to do? Are they taking those goals seriously? Are they taking the future of our state seriously? Or are they just watching out for their investors? And as voters, I think we have, there should be an expectation that we know that information, because we're the ones paying FPL's bills every month. They arrive in either your mailbox or your email.
It's the one utility we can't get away from.
Yeah.
Whether it's phone or power, I mean, we have to get them. We're dependent on them every day. And
ultimately, the term public servant, as you well know, having served, we are constituents. So do our elected officials respond to millions of dollars of donations, or do they respond to their constituents, the voters, or even folks who live in their district who maybe didn't vote? but could have.
Yeah.
Or so those are the types of questions that we need to ask, and that's why it's important to me to just shine a light on that. It's an accountability question at the end of the day.
So look, there are a couple things that are really important. COVID is the unmasking of a lot of inefficiencies that we have at all levels, and one dependence that we've had is on the tourism industry, right? The economy, South Florida's economy has been very much dependent on the tourism industry. And after COVID, we know that we took a huge hit, right? So we're looking, leaders across the county and across the country looking for ways to reduce their dependence and enter emerging industries. But I wanted to ask you about the jobs creation in this new area of decarbonization and clean energy, the resilience industry. Um, do you know anything about that? I mean, job
Yeah.
creator, building a new economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Florida, we have the opportunity to be a clean energy leader. And anytime you are a leader in an industry, that equals jobs and that equals strong local economies, which we desperately need right now. There are still so many people who are behind on their bills, whether it's their FPL bill or their car insurance bill or even their car payment. And it's going to take a while for this state to recover. But let's think hypothetically. So for example, if we wanted Florida to proactively and aggressively move towards decarbonization by year 2035, that means we need to build and design and research and install a whole lot of solar and batteries. We have the space to do it. We can do it creatively. The cost, again, going back to what NextEra tells its own investors, solar plus batteries is either equal to or cheaper than fossil fuel. So how about this? How about we get very aggressive and proactive about that, create a bunch of local jobs throughout the entire state. Florida's a very big state, right? We could be creating local jobs in a bunch of different, it's not just folks out, when they think solar job, you think the person, nailing the panel in. It's not just that. It's research, it's development, it's finance, it's working with all the local municipalities where you're going to be zoning these. It's marketing, it's communications, it's tax, it's sales. Like it's an entire
smart industry, right?
Yes,
smart industry.
Absolutely.
So while I was in the legislature, one of the biggest platforms for me, the biggest platform for me, was transitioning the existing workforce into future workforce.
Yeah.
And for me, I don't understand why we're not doing it. And you talk to some mayors and they'll tell you, we all talk about it, but we're still working at it. I would like to go back to this report that you published on December 4th and point out that there are a lot of moving parts, right? There's a lot of information that is still not clear, right? And we know that the local news channel, WPLG, Glenna Milberg, put out a report on involvement of possible dark money. But let me ask you, do you know where the legislators stand in majority on their alliance with big donors? It kind of speaks for itself, but in this industry or in this topic?
Well, I can't put words into anybody's mouths. The representatives from both parties have put out statements. I think there's a lot of questions that are currently being asked and that still need to be asked in this past cycle specifically, but also moving forward, just as a state politically, how are we dealing with this concept of dark money? Especially when it comes down to like the topic that we're talking about today, the utilities. And that's the focus of my work and holding the utilities accountable. So looking at the way the money was flowing this last cycle, specifically focused on these now being investigated Senate races, there is a possibility that the utilities could have been involved in that, just given the track record. The other thing that kind of solidified that possibility in my head was, of course, the breaking news when a former elected Frank Artiles basically, it was a drunken bar conversation, was how it was reported. essentially took credit for that. The reason that raised a flag in my mind is when he was in office, he was very close with the utilities. So much so, there was pictures of him in a Next Era jacket at a race, and he's accepted over $30,000 from utilities during his time in office, which is not an insignificant sum of money. He even fast-tracked legislation. For example, one was, and ultimately it didn't pass, but it would have charged FPL customers for exploratory fracking out of state. So he was doing the utilities favors while he was in office. So for him to then take credit essentially for some of this shadiness, that raises some questions that we really need to look into. And we may not know answers for a while, but I think the voters deserve to know.
So having worked in law enforcement for the better part of my adult life and having run a public corruption unit and investigated long-term cases, I will tell you that, the power subpoena, I'm looking forward to seeing what is divulged as a result of the subpoenas, but that's going to come in a very long time because the investigation's a long term. There's a lot of pieces to sort through. We're not making any accusations towards anyone. We're just sharing information that's factual and out there, readily accessible in the public domain. Let me ask you, Alissa, if someone wants to read up on, follow what you're saying, which I found very, very interesting. I had to sit down a couple times and reread to be able to put things together. Where can they find information about you?
So,
or about the reports that you're putting out?
Yes. So the Energy and Policy Institute, the website is energyandpolicy.org. Tried to keep it straightforward. We're tracking utilities and energy policy all over the country. So my focus is on Florida. Earlier, well, it was last week now, I put something out about the Orlando utility. I've put stuff out about potential attacks on rooftop solar, which we might see this upcoming session. And then, of course, there's the report that we're talking about today, looking at just utility spending in the last cycle. But energyandpolicy.org is the website. And, as I said, accountability is just so important. There is a lot of money flying around. I think, quite frankly, the future of our state is at stake. I love it here. I think you like it here.
I love it.
My daughter likes it. I would love for Florida to recover from a lot of the issues that we've been, especially this year, been dealing with. And that requires holding these powerful companies accountable ultimately.
Outstanding. So listen, we're going to wrap this up because I think the mayor should be coming on any minute, but I can't thank you enough. And I hope to have this conversation continue with you. I want to invite the utilities companies to come out and, give their side, as well as some of the legislators who will be up in the Tallahassee in the coming session. Starts, I believe, in March of 2021. It's a short 60-day window. Not an entirety of the 60 days is spent passing legislation. You have the weekends, you have days off. So it's a shorter period of time, 40 some odd days, maybe a little closer to 50. Very important for everybody to stay involved, stay informed, and we're trying to break through all the misinformation to put out factual information. Any questions, hit me up. My number is 786-708-1762. You can find me on my email is rasencio, that's rasencio.ra@gmail.com. Love to hear your comments, and hopefully we can extend this conversation and put things in the right context. Alissa, I can't thank you so much for showing up today and taking the time to be here. But any parting information that you want to share with our viewers?
Well, I very much appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to continuing this. As we just mentioned, the upcoming session I think is going to be very important for Floridians when it comes down to our local economies and our own pocketbooks. And there's a lot of stuff that we have to keep an eye on. I'm, of course, focused on utility accountability and happy to continue this conversation.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. I give you a hug, but we can't do that. So here,
there we
little
go.
Bump
Through the plexiglass.
Thank you, guys. See you next time. Next week, same place, same